Ewaso Nyiro River, early morning. The current was low but fast, laced with runoff from the distant peaks. From the south bend, a soft, broken splash kept repeating, then pausing, then starting again. A baby elephant lay half-submerged in the shallows, its legs twisted beneath the weight of its body. The water slid over its side in short, freezing waves. One eye was open but unfocused. The trunk barely moved. The sound had not been loud enough to carry. It was only by chance that Daari, on his way back from checking upstream tracks, had turned his head in time. He dropped his satchel and moved into the water without hesitation. There were no calls for help, no rope to throw. He waited until the water reached his thighs and crouched beside the calf. Its back was slick with silt and goose-pimpled from the cold. Breathing was shallow, barely one rise, then nothing, then another. The calf did not panic. It could not. Its muscles had surrendered to the cold hours ago. Daari slid both arms under the small chest and heaved. Nothing. His boots shifted in the sand. He tried again, this time rocking the calf first, shifting the limbs gently until one leg unstuck from the riverbed. The calf groaned, a low, raw sound, but did not resist. Daari pulled again, inch by inch, until the weight broke free with a suction pop and the calf rolled toward him, limp. The water poured off in thin sheets. His breathing deepened. The ears twitched once. With soaked sleeves and burning legs, Daari dragged the calf onto the narrow gravel shore. The river sloshed behind them. He dropped to his knees and pressed a hand to the young elephant's belly, waiting for movement. One breath. A pause. Another. He stood and grabbed his blanket from the satchel, unfolding it over the calf's back. Then he knelt again and wiped the trunk clean. Sand still clung to the edges of the eye. The calf blinked slowly. There were no herds nearby, no calls. The bush was quiet. Daari looked upstream and down. No tracks, no trail. If this calf had crossed, it had done so alone, or been left. That truth would come later. For now, the cold was the only threat. If the calf stayed wet, he would lose the rest of his strength. If his body shut down, he would not rise again. Daari knew the math. It was minutes, not hours. The ranger moved quickly. He pulled a dry cloth from his kit and patted down the legs and ears. The calf shivered once and his front feet curled slightly inward. A sign, small but not nothing. The kind of change that demanded attention. "Stay still," Daari whispered, not expecting comprehension. His voice was soft and low, more for the moment than the elephant. Then he rose again and collected dry brush to start a small warming fire a few feet away, just enough for heat, not smoke. He laid his coat beside the calf's shoulder and pressed it down gently. The calf exhaled, and the trunk uncurled a few centimeters toward the sound of the flames. The wind picked up slightly. Across the river, a pair of ibis flapped upward from the bank. No other movement, no sign of return. If the calf had been seen by the herd, they weren't coming. If it had been pushed by accident, there would be calls. If it had been left, the silence would remain. Daari sat beside the calf without speaking. The fire crackled softly. The body was still wet. The breathing was slow, but the eye blinked again, slower now. Not from fear, from exhaustion. He would wait here. He would stay until the shivering stopped, or didn't. Because if the calf cooled again, he wouldn't stand. And if he didn't stand, he wouldn't survive the next night. The calf had not moved in over an hour. His legs remained drawn beneath him, too weak to stretch. His skin, still damp despite the fire, had taken on a dullness that worried Daari more than the cold itself. The early sun warmed little, and the shadows clinging to the rocks along the river's edge stayed long and blue. The calf's breath came low and uneven, like a leaking bellows, and his belly barely rose with each cycle. Daari crouched near the front shoulder, his hand resting lightly over the thin blanket spread across the animal's back. No resistance. no tension, just weight and silence. From a distance it might have looked like sleep, but Daari had seen too many of these moments. Sleep didn't leave the eyes half-lidded. Sleep didn't let the body sag this heavy into the ground. It was something else now, something between recovery and surrender. The fire snapped behind them, casting slow warmth over one flank. The calf's trunk twitched once, more reflex than effort, and then stilled again. The ears, which had shivered earlier, now hung slack against his head. Daari reached into his pack and took out the old metal flask he used for field rehydration. He poured a few drops onto a cloth, cooled by the air but not cold, and touched it gently to the calf's lips. There was no draw, no swallow, just a damp smear, and the drops rolled off the cracked edge of the mouth. He tried again. This time, he pressed his hand just under the chin and tipped slightly. The calf moaned low, faint but real, a sound of protest or fear or the edge of pain, but it was something. Daari's shoulders softened. He held still for several moments, allowing the sound to settle, then laid the cloth aside. If the calf couldn't rise by midday, his muscles would begin to stiffen beyond recovery. Lying still too long could trigger internal collapse, lungs folding, stomach slowing, heart struggling to circulate through cold, shallow veins. And once that happened, even the strongest calves wouldn't recover. If he wouldn't stand, he wouldn't live. That was the fact. Daari moved toward the back legs. Carefully, with both hands, he shifted one limb outward, then the other. The calf did not resist. The weight dragged with it a trail of wet soil and loose grass. No strength to recoil, no strength to even tuck them back in. But his breathing didn't falter. It stayed, shallow, yes, but consistent. The sun edged higher. A faint mist still hovered above the water, and insects circled near the edge of the fire. A fish leapt in the distance, breaking the silence with a slap. The world was waking, but the calf had not. Daari pressed gently along the spine, checking for heat. The body was warming, barely. Enough to delay collapse, not enough to reverse it. "Come on," he said quietly, laying one hand on the shoulder again. "Just shift." The calf's head rolled slightly, the trunk brushing the dirt. His eye blinked once, slower than before. Then he exhaled long and low, and one ear moved with it, just a fraction. Daari sat back on his heels. It wasn't much, but it was more than before, and anything more was something to hold on to. If the calf rose today, his odds would change. If not, the night would take what the river didn't. He had until sundown to stand. Nothing could be forced. No rush, no shouting, no fear. Only waiting, and hope that something inside the small frame would push back, just once, against the weight of the cold. The fire stayed lit. The wind moved over the reeds. The ranger stayed kneeling beside him, not speaking again. Just listening. Just watching. The fire had burned low, a ring of orange coals sunk deep into the riverbank soil. Smoke drifted upward in a thin column, moving with the breeze, then folding into stillness. Daari stayed crouched beside the calf, legs aching but unmoving, a canvas sheet tented over part of the animal's side to hold the warmth. The sun had risen enough to throw long, soft lines across the water, but it had not reached the calf's skin. His body remained cold to the touch. The morning passed in silence. Daari did not speak. He wiped the calf's trunk again. He checked for flies near the eyes, swatted away a pair of gnats, and placed his coat across the belly where the wind pressed hardest. The calf did not lift his head. His ribs rose, dropped, then stilled for long moments before returning to rhythm. The skin beneath the eye had darkened slightly. Still no movement in the limbs. The hind legs remained stretched outward like branches fallen from their tree. He poured more water onto the cloth and dampened the ears, careful not to shock the nerves with sudden cold. One ear twitched, then fell limp again. Daari waited, watching for change. There was none. The air warmed slowly. A group of guinea fowl passed nearby, clicking their feet over dry gravel. Farther down the river, hippo grunts echoed in uneven intervals. But at this bend, the silence stayed. The calf had neither worsened nor improved, and that was its own danger. If hours passed without shift, the organs would begin to shut down not from trauma, but from fatigue. If the calf stayed motionless too long, he would cross a point that warmth alone could not bring him back from. Daari adjusted the canvas. He used his own body to block the breeze that curled off the river's surface. With one hand resting lightly on the calf's flank, he stayed still. The bones beneath the skin were prominent, young, underdeveloped, like all calves this size. He guessed no more than a year, possibly younger, still dependent, and completely alone. There had been no sign of a herd, no distant trumpets, no shifting brush or distant movement. It had been 3 hours since the rescue. If the herd had been nearby, they would have returned by now. If they hadn't come, they weren't going to. A thin, dry leaf tumbled across the sand, catching on the edge of the fire pit. The calf's trunk remained curled toward its chest, unmoving. The fire crackled quietly, wood shrinking into itself. Daari reached into the satchel for more kindling, fed it in gently, then pulled the edge of the canvas higher to trap the heat beneath. The body beneath it remained still. He leaned close again, fingers on the calf's cheek. A long exhale rolled out, warm against his skin. Then nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, the tip of the ear lifted. A single flick, like the last motion before sleep, and it dropped again. Daari froze. He said nothing. He didn't touch him. He waited. Another minute passed. Then the same ear moved again, more clearly this time. It lifted halfway, fluttered, and stilled. The eye opened slightly, unfocused, but alert. The breathing deepened. Not steady yet, but deeper. Not stronger, but slower. A sign. Daari let out a quiet breath and adjusted the canvas again, careful not to interrupt the shift. The fire remained close. The cloths stayed damp. The ranger sat back, shoulders hunched, boots half in the sand. It was not recovery. It was not yet hope, but it was life. And as long as the calf responded, however faintly, there was something left to save. The air moved across the water, soft now, and for the first time since dawn, the calf's eye blinked without touch. A flicker, a choice, a moment that held. The rumble came before the light, low, rhythmic, and far off, like a drum buried deep beneath the earth. Daari turned his head toward the sound, eyes still half adjusted to the haze of early morning. The calf, now partially dry and resting beneath the worn canvas, did not stir. His breathing had steadied in the last few hours, but his legs remained motionless. When the second rumble came, closer this time, Daari stood. A small cluster of trees shifted beyond the rise. Then a shadow moved between the trunks, another behind it. The herd had come. Daari stayed still. He stepped slightly aside, giving them space, folding the canvas halfway down to expose the calf's side. The fire was nearly out now, only a bed of heat buried in ash. The calf didn't react to the sounds, not even a twitch, but his eye remained open, glazed but alert. 4 elephants emerged at the edge of the clearing, then more. Dust rolled around their feet, soft and golden. At the center stood a large matriarch, her skin patterned with old river clay and deep-lined from age. She lifted her trunk, scenting the air, and paused. Her body shifted, forward 1 step, then still. Her ears fanned slightly, then relaxed. Daari backed up slowly, staying near but out of the direct space between the herd and the calf. He had seen this before. Herds would return, matriarchs would come close, but they rarely rushed. Reunions were careful, deliberate, and if the calf belonged to them, they would know, they would call, they would circle, they would claim. The matriarch took another step. Two younger females flanked her but did not move ahead. Behind them, the younger bulls shifted anxiously, testing the air with their trunks. Still, no one called. The calf did not raise his head. He lay there, small and thin and nearly lost in the shape of the earth. The matriarch's trunk extended again, curving slightly toward the shape on the ground. She rumbled, a short, barely audible sound, but did not advance. Her eyes held steady on the calf. Her feet stayed planted. If she recognized him, she showed no sign of it. If he had been hers, or their kin, she gave no signal. Elephants rarely made mistakes in memory. A scent, a sound, a small call, any one of these could anchor recognition. But the clearing stayed quiet. Daari watched as the matriarch turned her head. Her trunk lowered. She exhaled through it once, then turned to the left. The others followed her lead. One by one, they pulled away from the rise, moving back into the brush with slow, heavy steps. The calf remained still. His eye closed briefly, then opened again. Not in distress, just watching. Daari did not move until the last of the herd had vanished into the acacia thicket. The sound of the branches closed behind them like a curtain. There had been no call, no return. Whatever chance had existed for reunion had passed. If the calf had belonged to them, they had not claimed him. If he was unfamiliar, the matriarch had judged it too great a risk. And now the calf was alone again, without the herd, without his mother, without the protection that would have meant survival in the days ahead. Daari returned to his place beside him. He adjusted the blanket again, lowering it gently back over the calf's side. The warmth of the sun had begun to reach the fire pit. Grass at the edge of the river swayed in small gusts. No sounds remained but the wind and the water. The herd did not return, and the calf did not cry out. Only the morning stayed, and the soft rhythm of breath against the sand. The tracks in the sand were still fresh. They curved in wide, slow loops across the open bank and led back into the dense thicket beyond the clearing. Daari followed them with his eyes, noting how shallow they were. The herd hadn't lingered. Even the matriarch had barely paused. There had been no huddle, no reaching trunk, no echoing call to draw the calf back into their fold. Only a brief standstill, and then the quiet decision to move on. He crouched again beside the calf. The body remained low to the ground, legs tucked awkwardly, too long in the same position. The canvas had been pulled aside now that the sun was high. Flies circled the damp edges of his ears but didn't settle. The calf's eye blinked slowly, more often than before, and once, just once, he gave a brief huff through his trunk as if testing the air again. Daari reached for a cloth and wiped the side of the face clean, then smoothed a few granules of dried soil from behind the eye. The calf didn't pull away. He didn't lean in either. His stillness had changed. Less from collapse now, more from hesitation. The body held attention in strange places, in the shoulder, in the base of the neck, as if waiting for something that hadn't come. Across the river, a single elephant call rang out. Not a trumpet, just a low vibration. A statement, not a search. Then nothing followed. Daari turned toward the sound, scanning the tree line for movement. But the shape that had called did not return. The calf shifted his head slightly toward the sound, but did not lift it. If the herd had come for him, they would have come fully. They would not linger in shadow. If they had been unsure, they would have circled again. Elephants did not easily abandon their young. They returned for days, even weeks, calling out through heat and dusk. But when they did walk away, for good, it was never an accident. Something had broken. Something had changed. Daari stood and stepped a few feet back, giving the calf room. He needed to try rising again. Muscles weakened by cold would harden if unused. But he did not rush. Instead, he gathered dry grasses into a low pile near the calf's head, placed water nearby, and waited to see if movement would come naturally. Minutes passed. Then one foreleg pulled forward slightly as if testing the dirt. The movement was slow, unsure, but the foot curled and pressed. The other followed, then stopped. Daari moved closer, whispering low, "Easy now." The calf didn't rise, but his weight shifted again, and one shoulder trembled. His breathing deepened and the tip of his trunk grazed the grass pile. It wasn't effortful. It was curious. That small shift brought another truth into focus. The herd had made their choice. Whether the calf had been born too weak, or whether something had caused separation during the river crossing, Daari didn't know. But they had come. They had seen. And they had left. Now the risk shifted. With the herd gone, the calf would not be fed. He would not be protected from predators. He would not be guided toward water or shadow. If he stayed lying here, his organs would weaken further. If he stood and wandered alone, he would not survive the night. Daari walked to the edge of the brush, pulled a radio from his satchel, and keyed it once, brief and quiet. He gave coordinates, listed the animal's condition, and requested a sling team if movement didn't come soon. Then he returned and knelt again. The calf was no longer shivering, but he was no longer waiting either. His body seemed poised in the space between stillness and choice. Wind passed through the grass behind him, lifting the blades just slightly. He blinked again, then slowly lowered his head onto the soft ground. Nothing in him had given up, but he would not rise alone, and the wild had turned away. By late afternoon, the warmth had faded again. The bank lost its color first. What had been sun gold turned flat and gray. The coals from the fire no longer gave heat, and with the wind moving steadily off the water, Daari knew the calf's fragile temperature, barely gained, was already slipping. The body didn't tremble. That worried him more than if it had. Stillness could mean shock. Stillness could mean the organs were slowing again. He gathered what he had: 2 field blankets, a narrow canvas tarp, and a pack of clean cloths dampened earlier in the sun. Moving with deliberate care, Daari placed one blanket over the calf's spine and pressed it down gently, tucking the corners under the belly as best he could. The skin beneath had dried in patches, cracked in others, and he soaked the worst parts with water and softened oil from his kit. The tissue held together, but it was thin. Wounds here could tear quickly if the calf moved wrong. Another cloth was folded along the back legs. The tail, curled tightly to one side, did not react. The trunk, once lifted slightly in the morning breeze, now lay flat beside the mouth, still breathing, still faint. But every few minutes the calf's chest paused, too long, and resumed again. Daari lay down beside him, not out of exhaustion, though it had taken its toll, but for warmth. He stayed on his side, facing the same direction as the calf, and let the length of his body press gently against the young elephant's flank. The wind picked up around dusk. Across the river, baboons called to each other from their sleeping trees. The bush shifted once, twice, but nothing came close. Daari stayed where he was, eyes half shut, ears tuned not to the wild but to the small body beside him. The calf moved slightly after the 4th hour. Just a breath first, then the front knee gave a short twitch. Daari didn't shift. He waited. The motion stopped. Silence returned. Then the leg bent again, further this time, then stilled. By moonrise, the temperature had dropped another 5 degrees. Daari reached behind him and pulled the second blanket over them both. The calf's ear brushed his arm as he did, not in panic, but from a slight lift of the head. A signal. The kind that didn't call attention to itself but meant more than a sound. He whispered, not for response but to mark the moment. "You're okay." No other noise followed, but a few minutes later the front legs bent again. This time they held. The knees didn't collapse. The trunk shifted slowly along the dirt. One eye blinked. Then the calf shifted his weight and pulled his chest just barely off the ground. His back legs scraped once across the sand but didn't yet move forward. His front legs, trembling, held for almost 5 seconds before folding again. Daari stayed still. He didn't reach out, didn't touch. The effort had to come from the calf. That was the only way his muscles would relearn. The body had to believe in itself again before anything else could follow. But now there was something new. The shift had purpose. The legs had moved with control, not just a spasm. And most importantly, the calf had tried. It wouldn't be enough tonight. He would not walk yet. But he had not surrendered to the cold. Not entirely. Not now. The river moved quietly beside them. Grass near the edge rippled beneath a soft current of wind. Daari lay back again, eyes open, listening for breath, for heart, for any return of strength. The calf rested, half-curled now instead of flat. His legs no longer sprawled like fallen branches, and for the first time, he had chosen his own shape. The third morning broke without sound. Mist clung low along the riverbank, folding gently over the reeds. The sun had not yet cleared the hills when Daari stood to stretch his legs. The calf remained curled in the same position he had managed through the night, his front legs tucked beneath him, his breathing quiet but stable. There had been no attempt to rise since the last shift, but his body held its form, no longer spilling open across the earth like something spent. Daari walked a few paces to the edge of the water. His back ached from the ground, but he moved slowly, preserving the hush. The camp had not changed. No calls, no signs. The herd had not returned, and by now he was sure they never would. It wasn't until the wind turned west that he noticed movement upriver, just a shape at first, half blurred by mist, then clearer. A single elephant stepped from the edge of the acacia grove and into view. She was not part of the group that had come before. Her build was different, leaner, older. Her left flank bore long pale scars that ran across the ribs, healed but deep. Her ears were thin and ragged at the edges, and her gait was slow, not from age but from something older than pain. Weariness. Daari did not move. The calf lifted his head slightly at the sound of a distant branch snap, then laid it back down. The female stopped about 30 feet away. She didn't trumpet, she didn't rumble. Her trunk lifted once, hesitated, and then lowered again. She stood still for a long time, facing the two shapes by the river, one standing, one lying, saying nothing. Daari stayed where he was. The rules in moments like this were simple. Wait. Don't intervene. Let her decide. She took one step forward, then another. Her breath came through her trunk in a rhythm that sounded careful but unafraid. Daari watched the way her eyes remained fixed on the calf, not on him, not on the camp. She crossed the remaining distance slowly, dust brushing around her ankles. When she reached the calf, she didn't stop. She lowered her head and extended her trunk, letting it trail across his back from shoulder to spine. Not forceful, not cautious either. A straight movement, soft and direct, like memory. The calf flinched. Then he didn't. His ear flicked once toward her, and his body relaxed, the tension in his front leg melting slowly into the ground. She made no sound. Her trunk passed over him again, this time slower. She paused at the base of the skull, pressing gently against the canvas Daari had left tucked near the neck. He stepped one pace back, giving space, watching her body for signs of agitation. There were none. The calf moved again, not much but enough to pull his back legs underneath him, one after the other in a slow, wobbled shift. He exhaled sharply through his trunk, then adjusted again. Daari remained silent. He had seen introductions before. Some were violent, others indifferent, but this was something different. Not maternal, not entirely. More recognition than protection. Something in the way she stood told him she had known loss. the kind that does not look away from suffering, even when it isn't hers. She stayed beside the calf for 10 minutes without moving. Then, slowly, she lay down beside him, not close enough to touch, but close enough that their bodies shared the same breadth of space. Daari lowered himself to the sand again, watching both animals. The fire had not been relit. The blankets had been pulled aside. But there was warmth now, in the shared stillness, in the weight of presence between them. The wind moved through the trees upriver, bending the tips of tall grass just slightly. The calf did not call. The female did not leave, and the space between them no longer felt like silence, but something kept, something understood. The sun came slowly, widening across the river bend in long bands of light. The mist had lifted early, and now the earth warmed without shadows. Daari sat near the edge of the bank, his hands folded in the dust, watching the calf breathe beside the silent female. She hadn't moved since settling down the day before, not toward him, not away. Her stillness wasn't guarded, it was settled, like something had been chosen in her mind that didn't need to be tested again. The calf rose in the 6th hour, not in a rush, not all at once. His front legs extended first, lifting his shoulders awkwardly, shaking with effort. Then one back leg unfolded, dragging slightly behind. The other followed, slower, but steady. He braced himself against the slope of the bank and pushed upward, legs bent and unsure beneath him. His ears fanned outward once as if balancing, then fell gently back to his sides. He stood. Daari stayed where he was. The moment had its own quiet weight. He knew if the calf collapsed now, they'd have to start again, and his body didn't have the reserves for many more tries. But the trembling lessened. The back legs locked. The shoulders held. The trunk dangled low, swinging once before touching the dirt. The female did not rise. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see. Then she rumbled low, barely more than breath, and exhaled. The calf stepped forward, only once, then paused. Daari stood, not quickly, not with urgency, just enough to mark that he was ready. He walked toward the calf with calm, measured steps and removed the final strip of cloth from his back. He let it fall beside the flattened grass where they had slept. The calf turned his head toward him briefly. No fear, no flinch, just a glance. Then back to the female. What came next was simple. She stood, all at once, like a breath inhaled. Her legs moved beneath her without struggle, and her shadow stretched across the calf's side as she turned to face the river. There was no decision to make. It had already been made, somewhere between the night and the morning. She stepped forward, and the calf followed. Not behind, not beside, but just enough between to show he would walk with her, not on her. Daari did not call after them. He did not mark their path. He only stepped back and let the brush open in silence. The two moved slow but sure along the open flat beyond the reeds. Not toward the trees, not toward the trails that led deeper into cover. They walked into the clearing, their shadows stretching long in the full light, away from the river's pull. No herd joined them. No other shape waited beyond the hill. It didn't matter. He had stood. She had stayed. That was all that could be asked. Daari knelt once more to collect the fire remains. The coals were cold now. Ash stirred in the breeze, scattering along the old bed where the calf had first collapsed. Ahead, the figures moved through tall grass. The wind followed softly behind them. No one turned back. Nothing was rushed. But for the first time since the river, there was no pause in their steps. Just two shapes, side by side, walking forward into the light.